or criticisms. I actually found these criticisms very provocative and helpful, creative challenges for me to lean into. And I've begun to really consider the ways in which we might kind of accept anthropomorphism, accept anthropocentrism, and lean in to these slightly uncomfortable feelings to begin to understand perhaps the ways we are mediating animals, the way that we're metaphorizing them, idealizing them. I'm particularly influenced by a fantastic scholar called Nicole Seymour and her book Bad Environmentalism, which suggests ways in which we might be able to use frivolity, irony, playfulness, perversity, thinking around the natural world, but animals in particular, in my case, to suggest different ways of thinking around what environmentalism might be and moving away from kind of didactic, serious, earnest modes of being to kind of create a more joyful environmental future in thinking around how we think about the natural world and how we might care for it. So I thought what I would do is just read a couple of poems. So following on quite nicely from John's reading of his novel. This first poem I'm going to read comes from my first book called Significant Other, and I've popped it on the slide so you can read along. I'm particularly interested in the fable of the donkey in the lion's skin and ideas around concealment and disguise that we use in human language and in a way perhaps zoomorphizing ourselves rather than anthropomorphizing animals. So this is called True Animal. On a dozy summer's day, a donkey magpied a lion's skin that the hunters had left to dry in the sun. What else had the donkey to do but chameleon himself inside it? As he swanned across the paddock in his new ferocious fur, the horse began to mouse. The hare grew chicken-hearted and the chicken hared away. How good it felt to shark among the shrimp, he thought, and let out a proud hee-haw. The daisies widened their eyes. Mid-run, the chicken stopped. The hare and then the mouse dared themselves to look. Finding not claws but hooves, each turned upon him and, as any true animal would, parroted a short teaching on nature's true and fox. So in recent years, I've begun to think about anthropomorphism, perhaps at a kind of particular end of the spectrum, and to think about cuteness. So next month, I'll start an AHRC fellowship on cuteness in contemporary environmental culture, developing ecopoetic practice, which starts to consider the ways in which cuteness commodifies, but also cares for the natural world. I've been particularly interested in the relationships between extinction narratives and narratives around endlings, which of course are the last species or last individuals of a particular species, and the ways in which cuteness might intersect with these narratives, particularly thinking around kind of preciousness of extinction and endangerment narratives. And so the next poem I'll read, I hope, will find its way into my second book coming next year. And I think of this as a fable of sorts, reflecting on my practice. I think this is a fable, but we'll see. This tree frog is going extinct. And I should say, too, that this was influenced by Tuffy. Some of you may have heard of Tuffy, the last Rab's fringe-limbed tree frog, who died just a few years ago. This tree frog is going extinct, and so you should prepare yourself for sadness. This is what they told the woman. What kind of sadness? The woman asked, but they had already closed the door. She and the last of the species were to have exactly 3 minutes together. On a small square of moss, the tree frog sat stillish, as if it were a jelly doorstop. Each of its eyes stared like a magic 8-ball. She picked up the frog. Already 1 minute had passed. Is it a crying kind of sadness, she asked, directing the question to the amphibian. Most likely, one eye responded. The other eye, concentrate and ask again. There had been a time when the magic 8-ball was easy to spot, in people's homes, all manner of shops. Now she realised she hadn't seen one in years. From somewhere in the room, a croak alarm began to sound, which seemed, even to her, insensitively chosen. The frog shut down its eyes. The woman thought about shaking it gently for an answer to a question she would formulate later, but it was time to go. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, so quietly she could have been talking to herself. So the kinds of questions that I'm interested in, and I'm really looking forward to a session tomorrow and those other sessions that Carrie has so generously timetabled for us, is, I suppose, how Fable can communicate and teach our particular moment with regard to animal endangerment and extinction, and these endlings that unfortunately will continue to appear as we have more and more species in dire need of our help and protection, but also how Fable, as a multi-species storytelling form, can represent real animals, whatever real might mean here, but also the animals of popular culture. I'm increasingly of a mind that these animals that we see in stuffed teddy bears, the animals of Disney cartoons, are so significant to our relationships with the natural world from a very young age, and that Fable might be a really interesting literary form to begin to include these artificial animals, these animals of our creation, in our storytelling of them. So I'll stop there, and thanks very much for listening.